Bonjour.
Greetings to everyone, and welcome to this 37th meeting of the Official Languages Committee. Today, we are going to put aside our study on the collaboration accords to welcome the Commissioner of Official Languages and to deal with two very interesting subjects. First, the report on the annual report on official languages, and secondly, the study of the Vancouver Olympic and Paralympic Games. So our meeting will be divided into two sessions, and Mr. Fraser in his presentation will deal with both topics. So we will begin with the report on official languages and then have a series of questions, and then we will go on to the second topic. Mr. Coder, I'm very pleased to be discussing both subjects, but instead of dividing the report into two, given that Mr. Fraser is here, he can present his testimony on both topics. And then in any case, we have a series of questions. We can just have 2 hours, and then each person can choose what topic they want to talk about. Some people may prefer to talk more about the Olympics. I just want to understand why you're dividing it into 1 hour for each topic. Mr. Fraser could speak about both topics in general, and then we could ask questions, and I'm sure that we'll have a number of excellent questions on both topics. Yes. Mr. Godin, did you have a comment? In any case, we have time. Mr. Godin, you sent the agenda, and you said there's 1 hour for one and 1 hour for the other. In my opinion, I think we should do it in that way, because it gives the opportunity to target our questions on both subjects. But if we combine both, if we have a report to write on the Olympic Games, it'll be easier to divide the session, the meeting into two. Fine. So what we can do then, without further ado, is to continue with our timetable, and people are free to deal with the topics that they wish. And Mr. Rodriguez, I'm very surprised at the argument of Mr. Godin, because he can decide what he wants. Mr. Lemieux, I would just like to say that I would support Mr. Godin's argument. This is clearly organized in the agenda, two important topics, and I think that we should grant enough time for each topic. In any case, both topics will be dealt with on an equal footing. I see, Mr. Fraser, that you first decided to talk about official languages and then the Vancouver Olympic Games, so we can begin with one or the other, whatever you prefer. Mr. Chair, I can begin with the Olympics if you prefer, or I can begin with the annual report. It's really up to the committee. I'll bend to your will, and there's no problem. It's very easy to divide the text. There's no problem. So we'll start with the Olympics then. I know it's a little bit, it's not quite as long. The part on the report is a little bit longer. So I suggest that we begin with the report for the first hour, and then we'll go on to the Olympic Games for the second hour. Is that right? Is that all right? Mr. Fraser? I'd like to welcome Mr. Graham Fraser, Commissioner of Official Languages, and Ms. Catherine Scott, Director General, Policy and Communications Branch, and Mr. Dussault, who is the Assistant Commissioner, and Ms. Joanne Tremblay, who is General Counsel and Director of Legal Services. So the floor is yours. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, of the Standing Committee on Official Languages.
Report and comment on the preparations for the 2010 Olympic Games, which I will do later. When I tabled my first annual report last year, I drew attention to the fact that the government's actions did not reflect its words. I asked the government to show strong political leadership and take concrete measures to reinforce the progress that had been made. In my evaluation this year, I've made a number of observations on the government's position on official languages. I've continued my reflection on leadership and official languages, and I reaffirm that to be a leader in the public service, it's necessary to be able to inform, evaluate, explain, give advice, and inspire in both English and French. Une telle définition du leadership doit...
This definition of leadership must encompass all federal institutions, including the Supreme Court. It seems clear to me that Canadians have the right to be heard and judged in the official language of their choice. As I recently stated before this committee, judges in Canada's highest court should understand both versions of the laws, arguments made in court, and all discussions with their colleagues, regardless of which official language is used. The government reiterated its support for Canada's linguistic duality in its October 2007 throne speech. Yet, it did not set aside any funding for this area in the February 26th budget. The tentativeness and the lack of leadership are now evident. Despite the government's many statements in support of Canada's linguistic duality, there is no global vision in terms of government policies and the public service. This lack of leadership has resulted in a plateau being reached, and in some cases, a deterioration in the application of the official languages policy. I have noted that, yet again this year, very little progress has been made in several areas of activity, and the situation has even worsened in some institutions. The initiative that will replace the Action Plan for Official Languages is an example of a commitment that is slow in being honored and an example of tentative and uncertain leadership. The deadline of March 31st, 2008 is set out in the Action Plan. Nevertheless, the government has not had the foresight to create a new initiative or a replacement initiative before this deadline, and Canadians are still waiting for new developments. The Minister of Canadian Heritage and Official Languages has had the report on the latest consultations undertaken on this subject for several months, but has still not announced any concrete measures.
Samuel Beckett play, which could be called Waiting for the Action Plan. I sincerely hope I'll not have to spend another year watching a drama in suspended animation as the government bides its time. However, I'd also like to add that I was very happy to hear Minister Werner say in the House that the new plan will be made public, and I quote, very soon. The government must establish a clear direction and implement initiatives that will lead to concrete results. Some of the partners involved are concerned since they do not know what the objectives of the future initiative will be or how much funding will be granted. Over the past year, I've closely examined official languages coordination. A clear, strong, and ongoing commitment from the Prime Minister remains an essential condition for good governance. I therefore make 7 recommendations in my annual report to encourage the government to show stronger leadership. In particular, I recommend that the Prime Minister create an ad hoc committee of ministers to oversee the full implementation of the new action plan and language requirements in federal institutions. Similarly, I recommend that Cabinet review official languages matters at least once a year. In order to translate political commitment into action at the administrative level, I recommend that the Official Languages Secretariat be given the authority it needs to fulfill a horizontal coordination role in order to implement the Official Languages Act in its entirety. The goal of these recommendations is tangible results for Canadians. We need a better coordinated effort to effectively resolve the language of work problems that have plagued the federal government for 40 years. I recommend that by December 31st, 2008, deputy heads of all federal institutions report on the actions they've taken to create a work environment that makes it possible for employees in regions designated by the Act to use the official language of their choice. These regions are New Brunswick, the National Capital Region, and several parts of Quebec and Ontario. Linguistic duality is a fundamental component of Canada's public service. In an environment where Anglophones and Francophones work side by side, bilingualism is an essential part of leadership in a modern and efficient public service that reflects our country's values. However, over the years, the number of positions designated bilingual has not changed. These positions include mainly those that involve providing service to the public and, in some cases, supervisory positions. Public service renewal must make it possible to better anchor Canada's linguistic duality at the heart of the values and priorities of federal institutions. As 15,000 people are expected to join the public service every year, Canada's linguistic duality must be a consideration in the recruitment, training, and upgrading of skills. Successful implementation of policies on communications with and service to the public, language of work, and human resources management hinges on employees having access to high-quality language training from the beginning of their careers in the federal government. We must stop the practice of sending an employee on language training only once they've been appointed to a supervisory position. I call on the government to show greater coherence and put its good intentions into practice. In short, I ask the government to show leadership instead of simply managing the file. Through stronger leadership, the government will also have an influence on the changes that may affect Canada's linguistic duality. Studies published over the last few months by Statistics Canada describe how vibrant the official language communities are, but also describe the many challenges that must be met in a changing social context. I want to underscore that some federal institutions are providing significant support for linguistic duality and are making a concerted effort to ensure that both official languages can be used in the workplace, provide services in both languages, and implement positive measures to enhance the vitality of official language minority communities. Their work deserves to be recognized. I give several examples in my annual report, and I invite all deputy heads to draw inspiration from them. Federal institutions obtain better and longer-lasting results for Canadians when the government, senior management, and public servants show strong leadership by recognizing the rights and values related to official languages and linguistic duality, and by ensuring those rights and values are respected. The 40th anniversary of the Official Languages Act, which will be celebrated in 2009, seems to me to be an ideal time to turn this vision into action. Je vais terminer ici, Monsieur le Président, et revenir.
I'm going to wrap up here, Mr. Chair, and come back later with the presentation on the Olympic Games. Thank you very much, Mr. Commissioner. And now we're going to begin the first round of questions with the member from the official opposition, Mr. Coderre. Thank you, Commissioner. I'm very proud of your report, and I understand why now we want to set aside 1 hour for the Olympic Games and 1 hour for your report, because with the way the government is behaving in the file of official languages, I understand that they want to divert attention away from this topic. You know, Mr. Fraser? One moment, please.
As a committee, we determine what our agenda is. We determine what our subject matter is. The government had no influence over, no more influence over the setting of the ordre de jour than the opposition.
No more influence. Oui, votre point est valide, Monsieur Lemieux, et est accepté.
Your point is valid, Mr. Lemieux, and I accept it. Mr. Chair, I see that your report could have been because not only do you have a minister who tried to run away from the media when she is asked a question, she is responsible for official languages in our country, and she refuses to go before the Supreme Court, which is supposed to represent the inherent values of our country. And she refuses to say whether she agrees with the fact that Supreme Court judges with the fact that they should be bilingual, and that's a shame. There are enough horror stories in this report to open a museum, but I would like to hear from you can you, as a compliment to your report, can you tell us whether the way the public service behaves, if there is no leadership from the government, then does the fact that the official language is a secretariat, if it was reattached to the Privy Council rather than Canadian Heritage, wouldn't that be a way of helping us ensure that bilingualism is better respected in the public service? Mr. Chair, The the Senatorial Committee on Official Languages asked us to study this issue very closely. And we commissioned a study on the impact of horizontal governance, which was entailed by the decision to transfer the Secretariat. And after holding an open competition, the contract was awarded to Professor Donald Savoie to conduct a study on that. This was a fairly somber report, and it's going to be published in June, but this study was used to draft the chapter on that topic. And it was based on his recommendations in his report, and it was based on his observations in the report that we issued our recommendations to reinforce the Secretariat, to ask the Prime Minister to create an ad hoc committee to strengthen the link between the Centre and the Secretariat, which is responsible for coordinating official languages within the public service. We did not make a recommendation just to reattach the Secretariat to the Privy Council, but we did observe that there are certain elements that could be reinforced to make it work better. So you say that within this way of doing things, we could at least remedy the problem. That would be an approach that would, well, we can't solve the bilingualism problem entirely within the government, but to revisit that issue would help us be a little bit more effective. Is that right? Yes. And what is important, one of the report's guidelines, is the importance of leadership. And so we asked the Prime Minister to create that ad hoc committee, and we asked the Minister to reinforce the administration of mechanisms used to coordinate this file, to ask that the committee draft an annual report and submit it to Cabinet. That would be a way to recognize the intent of having a more horizontal management method within the government to reinforce the link between the Centre and the Secretariat. Obviously, our problem is that there is a lack of vision. Now, they'll call on all sorts of figures and tell you that they spent all kinds of money, but the reality is completely different. There's no vision, there's no leadership. And it's the difference between an executive and someone who actually does something. If there's an executive, we show leadership, but they are just trying to save face. Have you thought about how the government could award contracts with regard to the criteria being established? For example, if Public Works asks to oversee trade fairs and things like that, does that mean that the bilingualism criteria would be removed, even if they were responsible for certain projects? Do you sense a trend with regard to further privatizing government contracts? Do you think that official languages would no longer be a priority? I don't think that we've actually conducted a very close study on that, but for a very long time, the Office of the Commissioner has expressed a certain number of concerns with regard to the contractors. I remember a study that was done on restaurants that had received contracts. They were they were tenants, so it was the whole question of the devolution of certain responsibilities, and that is raised in our review of the changes to the Federation.
Thank you, Mr. Coderre. Mr. Gravel. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner, for your attendance here today. I was reading your report yesterday, and I have to say there was one thing that I was a little upset about. I get the sense that, sure, there's a policy for Canada as a whole, but you're not taking into consideration the fact that there's a specific situation in Quebec that is different from the rest of the country. On page 19, the investigation has shown, apparently, that only 49% of children who have an Anglophone parent go to English language school. And if both parents are Anglophones, then 70% of kids go to English schools. And this is of great concern to Anglophone school boards. Well, I have a bit of a problem with this. Can you really say that English as a language is threatened in Quebec? I think you have to make a distinction between the status of the English language and the fragility, if you will, of English-speaking communities in Quebec. On the island of Montreal, you would assume that given 600,000 Anglophones in that area, the situation is very stable or relatively stable, and that was borne out by the census. But if you look at Anglophones in Quebec City or in Sherbrooke or in Granby or in other parts of the province outside of Montreal, then you can see the same type of problems in terms of fragility, if you will, of these groups having access to schooling, institutions, etc. Schools that might have to close down, etc. The same type of problems that you might encounter among Francophones in other parts of the country. It is not enough simply to compare Francophones in Sudbury and Anglophones in Montreal. If you compare Anglophones in Quebec and Francophones in Saint-Boniface or Francophones in Sudbury, then you can perhaps draw a fairer comparison. By that same token, if you were to apply bilingualism as it is applied in Ontario or elsewhere, could French not lose ground in Quebec? Because this is something that happens. It happens to me in Montreal that I can't get service in French. It's unbelievable. If this happened in Toronto, the other way around, an Anglophone was unable to get service in English, well, that would be strongly condemned. It just wouldn't make any sense. But this happens to us regularly in Quebec. It depends where. I think, yes, you do indeed have to draw that distinction. I don't think that you can draw a comparison between the strength or weakness of Anglophone institutions and the fact that people get service in French or not. One of the comments that was made by Gérald Godin when he was at the time the chair of a committee at the National Assembly on the first amendments to Bill 101, he noted that the threat to French does not actually come from the Anglophone minority. It comes from English as a world language. At the time, we weren't talking so much about globalization as a term, but Americanization. But at the time, I was quite surprised. In fact, he was making that distinction between the status of Anglophones in Quebec and English on the continent. I think we have to maintain that distinction. Now, for Francophone minorities in other provinces, in this case, you've referred to deterioration over the last while, and what does that mean? Would these communities simply disappear if we do nothing? I certainly hope not, and I think not. One of the things that struck me in my position as Commissioner for Official Languages, the vitality of these communities. And if we compare the situation to what happened, what was the case 30 years ago and what's happening today with the creation of Francophone schools in all the provinces, establishments of school boards in all provinces, French language school boards, the establishment of Francophone Jurists Association as well in all of the provinces. There are also economic associations in these communities. And we see that the action plan has led to positive results for these communities in the area of healthcare, for instance, where health networks have been created throughout this country. Can we say everything is perfect? No. Are there major challenges still outstanding? Yes. But has there been progress in the vitality of these communities? I'm convinced. Yes. You were talking about Mr. Lord's report, which was tabled in March. There was some strong criticism of that report. You felt that there were some issues that he didn't address. I wouldn't say that it was strong criticism. I would say that I had something positive, some positive things to say about his report. I was quite pleased to see that he stressed the importance of including arts and culture in the second action plan. He made 14 recommendations. I did not really challenge any of those recommendations, but I did see that there were some things that he did not mention that could have been included in the structure of his recommendations. For instance, support for early childhood development could have been included under education. Access to justice could have been included within the service to citizens component. And the public service, which he did not mention, could be included in the recommendations on governance. So, well, I wouldn't say that it was strong criticism, but I did notice certain things that could have been included by government, and the government said, well, it's not those are not the only recommendations. There are recommendations that your committee made. The excellent report produced by our committee, indeed. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. I agree with you, Mr. Chairman, says Mr. Gaudin. There were 14 recommendations. And rather, Mr. Lord had 14 recommendations, none of which did not, all of which were present in our 30, among our 30-some recommendations. I'll get back to Mr. Lord's report. When you look at his mandate, he wasn't working with independent people. He was working with people who were working at Heritage or with the department. So really, it might be said that they're the department's recommendations rather than Mr. Lord's. There's nothing new there. I would criticize his report because there's nothing in it really other than what we already brought forth. So I can't really see how you could have been pleased with certain things, because arts and culture was our 32nd recommendation, and you yourself had made that as a recommendation. I don't want to enter into a debate on the Lord report. I think the Prime Minister is entitled to receive counsel from an individual with Mr. Lord's experience. When he was appointed, I reacted to his recommendations, and I think, well, apart from arts and culture, Mr. Chairman, there's not much else, is there, is what you're saying, isn't it? Isn't that true? Mr. Chairman, when faced with any recommendation for action on the part of the government, including the throne speech, my reaction has always been consistent. I say, I'm waiting for results. At the time of the throne speech, I said a throne speech is like a menu rather than a meal. All reports, all recommendations to government are indeed menus. And what I'm waiting for is the final result. Sir, I'm pleased with your report. I saw that you were frustrated. You don't want to wait around. But what are you going to do as a commissioner? I mean, what about this issue of going before the courts? There's a breach of legislation. What's going to happen? I certainly hope I won't have to make this type of decision. I am still waiting. I'm somewhat frustrated to still be waiting. But as I stated in my statement, I was pleased to hear the minister state that the plan will be available soon. You mentioned dates around December 2008. You're frustrated. You're unpleased. Indeed, Mr. Chairman. I'm not referring to the action plan for December 31st. Really, this is a recommendation that we made having to do with the deputy heads of federal institutions reporting on progress made as far as language of work is concerned. So I wasn't talking about the action plan. I was talking about your recommendations. Yes, no longer the action plan. Let's say we look at your report. You state this vision of the role of a central agency could be at the center of the reason why there was a transfer from Privy Council office to Heritage. The message that was sent out is that official languages were no longer a priority. In your recommendation, why don't you ask for it to go back to the Privy Council office from Heritage? What we did, Mr. Chairman, is that we realized that the issue of governance for certain files where horizontality is an important governance aspect, we felt that the best approach would be to retain an individual so that that person could, Donald Savoie, could carry out a study, and based on his observations as to the trends in governance, we made our recommendations. You still have 1 minute, Mr. Goutin. I thought you were about to cut me off. Would you not agree? Okay, look, you have recommendations. I see your report. It's quite harsh with government, and I'm hearing the government say that it's a good report, everything's going well, we're satisfied. He's telling us positive things about our work, and the message you're sending out seems to me to be that it's not going all that well. We have some communities that come before us and say that they need to get lines of credit just to be able to function. What would you have to say about that? What are you doing out in the field to try to help them? Mr. Chairman, as I travel through the country and meet with community groups, I hear them raise problems, issues relating to financing or funding and the delays in receiving funding from government. And this is exactly the type of thing that led me to express some frustration as to the delays in announcing the action plan. I'm fully conscious of the fact that if there are delays in sending funding to small groups in sometimes remote communities, communities sometimes, or organizations sometimes, find themselves in a position where if they have to spend a certain envelope within a certain period and the money arrives only in December, then it becomes very difficult to manage. So it is not strictly an issue relating to the action plan. It's a generalized problem relating to the administration, And the problem has been worsening over the last few years. This is not something that is strictly related to the action plan. Thank you, Mr. Gaudin. On the government side now, Mr. Lemieux. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner. We have noted the analyses in your report, and we thank you for your work. That said, I get the sense that there is sometimes a bit of a gap between the appreciation you have of the work of government and the actual results that are found in the report. For instance, when you look at performance over the last few years, page 111 in French, table 4. Point of order, Mr. Gaudin? Is he saying what he's thinking, or is he reading a minister's text? That's not a point of order. I'm sorry. You have your time, and I will not accept your point of order. Mr. Lemieux can continue. I apologize for my colleagues interrupting me. On page 111, table 4, we see some trends, and there's been an improvement in terms of federal institutions. And a little later on page 115, table 5, you see that the number of complaints regarding service to the public have decreased 5% over the same period. So this seems like a encouraging trend that should be noticed, really. You're asking the government to show some leadership rather than simply managing this file. But it would seem as though this management is giving positive results, and we would feel that progress has been made. With respect to support for official language minority communities, our government invested $30 million additional to support them. Would you not feel that that draws a more nuanced and less negative picture of the situation compared to your report? Mr. Chairman, I always felt that this report was nuanced. And one of the reasons why I focused on leadership and global leadership was because of some inconsistencies. Yes, certainly there are some departments where there is progress. We've noted that. What I noticed, however, is that in departments where we do see leadership that is obvious, where the minister and the deputy minister have worked together and stated this is a priority for our department, we need to do better, then we really do see results. For instance, Public Works received a rather bad grade 3 years ago. Last year, it was an average marks, and this year the marks are much better. The grades are much better. So this is an indication of the minister's involvement and his determination. In my presentation, I did point out that there are examples throughout the annual report. And I think that is why this is a nuanced report, balanced, and I think these distinctions between some departments who have managed to do a good job and others that have had average results and those that have not done well, I think the real difference is due to leadership. So really, I asked the Prime Minister to focus on leadership so that this can be obvious throughout all of government. Yes, I agree, though there have been examples of progress, examples of leadership. The Canadian Tourism Commission, when it was moved from Ottawa to Vancouver, I expressed some concerns in my annual report last year that it might be more difficult for the Commission to really serve Canadians in both languages, given the fact that you're transferring the services from a bilingual region, the National Capital Region, to a region where employees do not have the right to work in French. But we noticed in our analysis that the performance was exemplary. And this is due to determination and leadership within this organization. But in general, we've seen a plateauing, and this is why I would say, even in a way, the success stories have shown that it is possible for the entire system to meet these obligations under the Act. If this sporadic leadership we seem to see throughout the departments could exist at the highest level of government.
As you mentioned, there is progress that's being made, but unfortunately, the press release that you sent out does not reflect this progress. And unfortunately, most people read the press release and not the report as a whole. And that's why I think that it's a good idea that you have come before us today, because we can talk about the report in order to underscore the progress made. And it's the same thing with immigration. Immigration is a critical issue, and certainly is a question that we take very seriously. And you mentioned that there were initiatives taken by the former government, positive initiatives, and positive initiatives taken by our government as well. But it must be taken into consideration that with immigration, it takes time to see real long-term results. I myself announced $7 million at the Cité Collégiale to support new Francophone newcomers who settle in Ontario. So do you recognize the work that is being done in this critical issue? Very briefly, Ms. Commissioner. Yes, Mr. Chair, that's in the report. And what I do underline in the report is that to make immigration a success story, things are much better when there is collaboration between the federal government and the provincial governments, as well as with the communities. So when there is this type of joint effort, when both levels of government work with the communities, that things work much better. But there are real problems. It's not something that can be solved, as the member said, overnight. But when everyone works in the same direction, when people work together, then results can be achieved. Thank you, Mr. Lemieux. We started a little bit late this morning. However, I would also like to point out that it was at the Commissioner's demand that we're going to discuss these two topics. So we'll go with a quick round of questions of 3 minutes, and then we'll go on to the next topic. Official opposition, Mr. Rodriguez. Mr. Chair, Mr. Lemieux is not busy enough, obviously. He's trying to make Mr. Commissioner, he's trying to make the Commissioner say what he wants and rewrite the report. I'm going to read from the first 3 pages. This tentativeness and the lack of leadership are now evident, despite rather, this lack of leadership has resulted in a plateau. And he also talks about tentative and uncertain leadership. And so I would, and also it asks the government to show leadership. So this is very critical, because leadership is essential when we want to change things. And it's as if the government is talking out both sides of its mouth. It says, do what we say, but not what we do. So with regard to, they say official languages are important, but it abolishes the court challenges program. It continues its consultations, whereas it's time to act. And now that the first phase of the Official Languages Action Plan is expiring, it's not renewing it. So I have 2 questions. With regard to the Lord report, when you said that there are sectors such as literacy, early childhood development, and access to justice, those are critical issues, and I'm thinking of early childhood development. When mothers and parents don't have access to daycare for their young people, that's when assimilation starts. It's at that age when assimilation already takes hold. Since Bill S3, I've asked communities, they don't seem to feel this change. Do you sense it? With regard to early childhood development, I do think that it is a gateway for French language education in these communities, and if that gateway is not available, then it becomes much more difficult for the communities. In several provinces, there have been very successful projects where the existence of French language daycare has had a considerable impact. With regard to Part 7 of the Act, I have always claimed that it is a good idea it is a good idea not to have any regulation or definition because it opens the door to a broad-based collaboration. But to date, we have noticed that the departments, the agencies, and government institutions are stronger with regard to process than with regard to product. So if we look at achievements under Part 7, we can cite the creation of committees within departments, or information that is transmitted within the departments. But what is important is to pave the way to collaboration between these institutions and minority communities to discuss positive measures.
Leadership here and pass the microphone to the next witness, Mr. Chong.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have some questions for the Commissioner concerning post-secondary education.
Observations and recommendations in the report. Firstly, with respect to post-secondary education, I note that you observe that Canadian universities and colleges are not graduating bilingual students to the degree to which the Government of Canada requires. And on page 42 of your report, you make a recommendation that the federal government work more closely, or you state that the federal government must work more closely with Canada's post-secondary institutions to encourage students to learn both official languages, and that universities must be made aware of the language requirements of the federal public service in order to help the government recruit graduates with adequate language skills. I was surprised to see it wasn't a little more categoric in your report. And I'm wondering if that's because you're undertaking a study of this issue. I note in the report, later in the report, you note that you indicate that you're undertaking a study of how second language training is done in Canadian universities. Is that why you're not as categoric about it in this report?
Yes, we have embarked on this process. It was one of the things that I felt very strongly about when I started in this job and began from the outset engaging in conversations with the Association of Universities and Colleges in Canada and the President Claire Morris. And what has emerged from that is a study that we have now started. We've sent out the questionnaire this month to begin by doing a repertory of what the programs are now that are available in Canadian universities in terms of either delivering courses in French to maintain or improve the level of French of students that have been in immersion, and also French courses for students who have not necessarily been in immersion and who arrive at university and want to learn the other language. I say French. The survey also applies to what's available in English in French language universities, and this is the very first step in terms of, first of all, simply finding out what's being done. One of the things that I realized is that there are a number of universities that are doing some quite interesting things that people aren't aware of, that I wasn't aware of, and I think the first step in terms of making progress is for everybody to be aware what's being done now.
And you talk about it in your report, like Edmonton. And as you know, the committee will do his next big study. The committee will do is on post-secondary education. So we'll now move on to Mr. Malo. Monsieur Malo.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Commissaire, je vais vous poser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Commissioner, I'm going to ask you 5 very brief questions, and you will have all the rest of the time to answer. How do you explain the delay in the tabling of the action plan on official languages? You state in your report that the situation of the language of work has even deteriorated in some institutions. Which ones, in your opinion, would the appointment of bilingual judges to the Supreme Court be an example of leadership that the government could show to promote linguistic duality? We have noticed that Air Canada once again this year received a considerable number of complaints. So what can Parliament do to improve Air Canada's score, if you will? And my last question. We have noticed that the greatest number of complaints come from Quebec and the region of Ottawa. So why, in your opinion, is that the case? With regard to the delay in the tabling of the second phase of the action plan, you need to ask that question to the government. I don't want to speculate. I already said what I had to say on that topic. With regard to the language of work, I would say that what we do see with regard to language of work is the marked contrast that we see between the level of satisfaction on the part of francophones in Ottawa and anglophones in Quebec. And often there are departments in Quebec where there is a fairly high level of frustration on the part of anglophone employees. Parks Canada, Service Canada, Canada Post, for example. And on the part of francophones in bilingual regions, the Ottawa Port Authority, 2006-2007, it was 60%, 2007-2008, 49%. Health Canada, 2006-2007, 68%, 2007-2008, 58%. Correctional Services, 2006-2007, level of satisfaction 76%, 2007-2008, level of satisfaction 67%. CMHC, 73% in 2006-2007, 2007, the level was 67%. So we can see that over a year, I mean, I don't have an explanation for that. Is it because there was a transfer of staff? What is that, because there's a greater sensitivity to the right to work in one's mother tongue? I can't explain that. Very briefly, please, Mr. Fraser. Air Canada. There is a task force that is going to be working with Air Canada. As for the appointments of judges to the Supreme Court, I think that would be a very important example of leadership. And as I said before this committee and my last appearance, I think it's very, very critical. As for Quebec and Ottawa, I think that indeed those are the areas where there is more contact between Anglophones and Francophones. And that's where the challenge arises in order to provide services in both languages. So that completes the first part of our meeting. We will now go on to the Olympic component, the Olympic Games component, and perhaps we could begin with the Commissioner's opening remarks. I don't think we'll adjourn. I think that we'll just go on to the with our work. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Petit, I understand that the Commissioner will be speaking about the 2010 Olympic Games with regard to bilingualism. I would like to say that we don't have to ask questions on that. Is that right? I want to listen to the report, but I don't have to ask a question on it. Is that right? Because if that is the case, then you awarded 7 minutes. So we weren't able to ask questions with regard to the report, and I don't find that fair at all. I would like to hear your instructions on that. Would you mind, Mr. Coderre, please? I think that is what I said at the beginning. I would just like to say, Mr. Petit, to date, all the political parties had the same time. Everyone had 7 minutes, plus a short question of 3 minutes. And I intend to do exactly the same thing with regard to the Olympic Games, if our time allows. Commissioner Fraser, please go ahead. Mr. Chair, I am just taking for granted that any member has the right to ask any question. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Mr. Commissioner, we are supposed to be relevant to the topic at hand, but I'm using the chair's discretion here. I apologize, Mr. Chair, for having imposed upon the role of the committee. As I pointed out in my annual report, my office has undertaken a study on the bilingualism of the 2010 Olympic and Paralympic Games. The study focuses on the readiness of the Vancouver Organizing Committee for the 2010 Olympic and Paralympic Games of VANOC to meet the language requirements identified in Annex A of the multi-party agreement signed in November 2002. Our study does not examine the broadcasting of the Games in both official languages. This study is a preventive step, because I do not want to go to the organizers after the game with complaints in hand, telling them what they should have done. Our study should help VANOC address potential shortcomings before the Games. I emphasize that VANOC clearly considers linguistic duality to be an important value and a key consideration in planning the Games. VANOC is committed to exceeding its official language's responsibilities. Although study of this matter is still underway, we have already identified some key issues, particularly regarding resources allocated to official languages within VANOC, a growing demand for translation and simultaneous interpretation, signage, and volunteer recruitment. VANOC would be much better able to become a model of bilingualism for the next Games and achieve the vision of a bilingual Games were it to implement effective solutions to resolve these issues. In terms of signage in the Vancouver-Whistler corridor, the federal government, along with VANOC, should provide leadership and work with its provincial and municipal counterparts to ensure that Canada's linguistic duality is apparent to everyone in any location where the Games are featured. Recruiting a sufficient number of qualified bilingual volunteers from across the country is essential to the provision of high-quality bilingual services at all sites to athletes, Olympic officials, the media, and the public. However, we cannot forget that not everything happens at the Games sites. Many federal institutions, border services, the RCMP, airport security, and so forth, will play a key role in projecting Canada's image as a host country in both official languages. My office is already working with these institutions to ensure that this aspect of the Games is also successful. I believe that the 2010 Olympic and Paralympic Games are a golden opportunity to showcase Canada's linguistic duality to the world.
Merci, Monsieur le Commissaire.
Thank you, Commissioner Fraser. We will now start with our first round of questions, and we'll begin with Mr. Coderre. Commissioner Fraser. at the request of Mr. Petit, perhaps I should ask you if future judges of the Supreme Court should be bilingual and attend the bilingual Olympic Games, and that way we could combine two questions into one. After the problems experienced in Nagano, I had the Canadian Olympic Committee sign an agreement to ensure that henceforth everything would be bilingual, and the COC now pledges to ensure that everything will be bilingual, whether it be media relations, communication with the people there, and so forth. Now, I've heard you said a great many times "should," the word "should" in your presentation, and that is a little bit worrisome to me. You know that John Furlong is very sensitive to this issue. As far as you know, have their agreements been signed with the Campbell government and the municipalities of Whistler and Vancouver to ensure that signage is put up? Second, because we're coming back to the interministerial committees, Mr. Emerson, he's the one who's responsible for this file. Does he have an agreement in place to ensure that all services will be offered and that bilingualism will be ensured, not only on the Olympic site, but in all the surroundings?
And third, which is a major point everyone is sensitive to, the issue of broadcasting. You know that there are francophones who will not have the ability who will not have access actually to the Olympic Games in their own language, because there's a difference between the French networks and, say, CTV. So all of these issues have to be dealt with. What has been done so far, and what can you do to make sure this work gets done, and what can we do to support you and to make sure that this government shows good leadership? I've held a number of meetings with Mr. Emerson, and I got the impression that he is determined to ensuring that linguistic duality is upheld when it comes to these games. With respect to the agreements between the federal government and provinces and municipalities, I'm unaware. What I understand is that the multi-party agreement between the government and VANOC deals with all official signage for the games. Our study is still underway, but the concerns that were raised during our interviews would lead us to believe that VANOC has some concerns with respect to the cities and provinces to see whether the signage will indeed be in both language. So that is something that we certainly raised as a concern that should be looked at. So you're not, at this point, it's not been done yet. We're unsure. There's no agreement. That's correct. So we have to make sure then that we can have access to these services. But signage is one thing, but service delivery is another. We can't simply make sure that signs are in both languages, and in French and in English, but the issue also of the Francophone community, I think in BC, they've done incredible work, and with the Canada Games that were held in Whitehorse, that was rather exceptional. Can we be sure that service delivery will take place in both languages? And also, finally, that issue of media and broadcasting. The issue of volunteers is a part of our study. I haven't seen the results yet, but I know that there was some contact and some discussions with the BC Francophone community and other community groups. But yes, indeed, I hesitate to mention anything that was mentioned in the report, because I haven't seen it yet. What about within the management committee? Every time there is some kind of mention of any kind of services, I know that on the board there are francophones, but on the executive, do you know that there is a francophone aspect a person there who can not only ensure that we're talking about it, but actually doing something about it. That is one aspect that we will be considering in our study. The issue of official languages, is that being dealt with within the organizing committee, just to make sure? And what about broadcasting? With respect to broadcasting, well, that is something we are looking at very closely. I recently held a meeting with CTV officials, representatives to whom I expressed my concern. I have to say that it was a positive meeting, but there are some aspects that are yet to be determined. Say, for instance, I raised my concerns about hotels. CTV assured me that there would be no problem, that there would be free access to services in the hotels, but hotels have to access these services. They have to be made available. I don't know, Mr. Chairman, if you've experienced this, but I've tried in the past to tune in to a given television show when I was in a hotel room, and I realized that it was simply not available in that particular hotel. I would certainly not want parents of athletes or journalists who are francophone, I would not want them to be able to, for instance, they should be able to access certain programs for free over certain types of networks, but within hotels, for them not to be able to access it, that would be very unfortunate. Thank you, Mr. Coder. I feel all of your questions were perfectly relevant to the subject at hand. Mr. Malou. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to continue along in the same vein. With respect to CTV, when you discussed the matter with CTV, did they tell you that they had set up a dedicated team, like a team that was there to ensure that not only in hotels, but elsewhere, everywhere? So it's not simply about offering the services broadly, but making sure that for each client group, and I think you mentioned clients that are in hotels, but there are other groups as well. Is there a dedicated group or team working on that? Were you assured of that? I get the impression that this is an issue that they take seriously. Some aspects of the picture are not quite clear yet. There are some discussions that were held with major cable distributors, but there are some small ones as well that have not signed. So I emphasized how important this is. The gap that remains at this point is that there are a number of households who have no access to cable and no access to satellite, and that remains a subject to be discussed because there's a limit to what CTV can actually do when it comes to over-the-air broadcast in the traditional sense. So this conversation is ongoing. They're taking the matter seriously. But one thing that I was told and had not heard before is that there would be French language services this year that would be available on the net at all times. So that is an innovation that I was not aware of myself when I was told about the way that the games would be broadcast. Based on what I hear of your study, it's not something that will be on a one-time basis, really. This is something that you will be continuing to do on an ongoing basis during the games, from now until the games. to follow how these games, how the delivery of services operates? Well, really, we're talking about a study on preparedness, if you will. We wanted our study to be ready for organizers ahead of time so that they could make the necessary corrections and so that you could react to that. Yes, that's it. There will be a preliminary version that would be available in the summer and a final version available in October. Yes, that's really the point, to have a final study with a series of recommendations in the fall to give VANOC the time it needs to implement these measures. But clearly, after the study's been carried out, we're going to continue to follow the issue and see as to the recommendations being implemented. If I may, Mr. Chairman, we will also be trying to use the games as a stepping stone so that we may speak to other institutions. I briefly mentioned it in my speech, but I would not want linguistic duality or the success of the games when it comes to linguistic duality be limited strictly to the sites where the games will be taking place. Because visitors who are arriving in airports, at our border points, who are dealing with the RCMP, need to have a Canadian experience when they arrive here. We try to work with all of these institutions to say, are you aware of the fact that in the context of the Olympics Games, it's even more important for you to meet your obligations? So it's one way of saying it's very important for the presentation of the games to improve upon or increase the access to this bilingualism in Canada for people arriving when they arrive in the country. So you're going, in your studies, you're going beyond that sort of superficial level, beyond the signage, etc. But the issue of comprehension, understanding how the network, the French network works, that there are people within the games that are reflecting on this and acting based on the client groups that are out there and that work based on other types of networks and channels. Well, certainly we are looking at all aspects, management, translation, interpretation, signage, welcome. In order to do all of this, to present the games in both languages during a rather limited period, which is really 17 days in February 2010, it requires some preparation. So we're trying to help them to do this. And as far as we know, the relationship between the Francophone community in BC and VANOC are actually very good at this point. I have no doubt as to Mr. Furlong's determination to make sure that the games uphold the Official Languages Act regulations. Thank you, Mr. Malo. And we did take note of what you were saying about the analysis being ready in the fall. Mr. Gaudin. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also met with CTV, RDS, and I have to say that I was impressed by how far they've come on this file. So far, at least, they've impressed me, but there's one thing that they haven't been able to do for Francophones. The issue of RDS not being available to everyone. You said earlier on that there are some people who don't have cable, or perhaps they just can't afford the internet. Would you say that Radio-Canada, being a public broadcaster, Radio-Canada CBC, has a mandate for the nation and that this should be a part of its mandate. So the issue of programming, they're very, very strict about that. But at the end of the day, do they not have a mandate to serve the Canadian people in both official languages, to come to some agreement? Yes, certainly there's CTV, there's RDS, TQS, cable companies, they're all working together. Some are even going to open up free channels for the public. I'm sure you've heard about all of this. Where is Radio-Canada to be found in this issue, on this issue? For the time being, Radio-Canada is taking the position that they have tried. They put in a bid and it was not accepted because CTV's was about 60 million more than Radio-Canada's. There was some correspondence between CTV and Radio-Canada. For the time being, I don't believe the discussions are ongoing with respect to Radio-Canada's mandate. The problem in all of this is that the contract that exists for broadcasting the games is a contract which was signed between the international group responsible for the games and the organization that bid on the games. Let's say, all right, we all agree that CTV got the contract, CTV. If they could have contracts, though, with RDS, TQS, and others, I would think that Radio-Canada could set its pride aside and say, we are here to help Canadians. Would you not agree that if Radio-Canada is not there for francophones in this country, there are some people that are not going to get the French signal? It would be absolutely impossible. We've seen a series of figures on the number of households, francophones, throughout the country who do not have access to cable. I'm reluctant to throw these figures out because it's very difficult to determine the number of people we're dealing with, but the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, seems to be saying that we can reach 75% of the public. So based on Radio-Canada's mandate, I'm not exactly sure whether it's up to me to determine what CBC Radio-Canada's mandate is exactly. I'm having some difficulty, given the contract signed between Radio-Canada and TQS and RDS, how you could have Radio-Canada also provide services without competing, essentially, with the others. How do you really target those 20,000 people, households? How do you do that without competing with those people that paid for the contract? Well, you may find some difficulty there, but they never seem to say that. The Radio-Canada simply said, I didn't get the contract. I'm not involved. I don't want to get involved. No one actually came before the committee to say, TQS never came before the committee to say, we don't want Radio-Canada involved.
This problem was reported to me in some of the conversations I had, Mr. Chair. One possibility that I raised when I held discussions was that when there are communities for one reason or another where a number of people don't have access to cable or to satellite transmission, I raised the possibility that a satellite be made available for transmission, for example, in a community center. And I think that that is a possibility that could be explored. And something that I said when I held these conversations is that just because a solution was rejected in the past, I don't think that it should be excluded from consideration now. So I'm not rejecting any solutions out of hand. Because it could be complicated. Thank you, gentlemen. We will now go to the government side with Mr. Denis Lebel. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Fraser, Ms. Scott, Ms. Tremblay, Mr. Dussault, thank you for being here. We have heard clearly what you've said to us this morning, and as usual, we're going to continue to assume our responsibilities and to do our work and to show leadership. You want it to be more affirmative, but we will continue in that direction, and we'll continue to be attuned to official languages in our country and to assume our government responsibilities and to deliver the goods as we usually do. With regard to the Vancouver Olympic Games, we have shown leadership. The presence of Mr. Furlong and his organizational team, who came to here to testify, impressed us thanks to the work they've done. And Mr. Emerson has also shown great leadership in that area. And I understand that preventively, it is normal that you conduct studies and make recommendations at this stage. As concerns that element, what you have observed to date, I know the report will be tabled in the fall, but regarding what you have seen to date with regard to official languages and the Olympics, what do you have to say? First, I sense a great deal of determination and will to succeed. I sense a commitment to collaboration. Like you, I admire Mr. Furlong a great deal, and I'm extremely impressed. But I do think that initially, my impression is that VANOC's model was the Torino Games, where they saw after the fact that Torino had major problems with regard to respecting both official languages within the Olympic Games. So we are trying to pinpoint exactly what is required to ensure that simultaneous interpretation is available on all sites, that all documents will be translated, and that all the volunteers are in place. Now, in all these sectors, there is still work to be done, and at a certain point, additional resources will be required in order to make this a veritable success story. There are technical elements with regard to availability to bring together the necessary number of interpreters for a very short time. Now, that takes a great deal of advanced planning. I have undertaken certain discussions to help them achieve this goal, and I think that the report will indicate where there is work to be done to succeed in that regard. I would like to express my great appreciation for the collaborative approach shown by Mr. Furlong and his team. We work together, and in the annual report, when I refer to the new role of ombudsman, it's not just a formal role as an ombudsman, but also we can use studies to reflect our will to work together with institutions. And I often give that example of collaboration with VANOC. I think something important that will come out of this committee is that we will be able to remind VANOC that we are committed to ensuring that official languages will maximize the visibility of Canada, and that the Francophone communities of BC also know that we are aware of their contribution, and we're going to continue to work together with them to improve the situation even further and to ensure that the results reflect our expectations. Now, as concerns broadcasting rights, we should recall the context because it's very important. VANOC, when it receives the country's candidacies, they already know that TV rights will be negotiated by the host city. VANOC holds a call for tenders, and consortiums are called to submit their candidacies. This consortium submitted a bid with the CTV and TQS, submitted a bid that was $60 million higher than Radio-Canada, and they are trying to broadcast across Canada. Is that right, just to date? And this consortium, with what is happening with TQS, I'm not saying that TQS won't be around, but it wants to continue to hold business discussions with other partners. And you said earlier that Radio-Canada was among those partners, but the discussions are being held on a business basis. Is that right? Yes, that's what I understand. And if Catherine Scott knows anything else, then she would say so. No, that's exactly right. And what we understood from our meeting with CTV is that the discussions with the cable distribution companies are looking positive, and a free signal may be provided through large cable companies to ensure that RDS will be made available where it is not available now. Of course, discussions are still ongoing with small cable companies. Obviously, our government wants to see all Canadians be able to watch the Olympic Games in their language. So we will continue to hope that the discussions go on, and I would like to thank you for your work in helping us achieve that objective. How does VANOC react to the fact of having volunteers from throughout the country? Some people are actually taking 2 or 3 weeks out of their holidays to provide support for official languages. How did VANOC react when you recommended that there should be even more bilingual volunteers? They reacted positively. They are in the process of measuring the scope of the challenge. But yes, they're visiting schools. They are reaching out to minority communities. But we would like to see a certain evaluation process so that people who claim that they are bilingual, so that we can be sure that they can actually greet people in both languages. We're trying to conduct follow-up on the nature of the real problems that exist. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Lebel. We're going to continue with our second and last round of questions, which will be 3 minutes, with Mr. Jean-Claude Damour. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Fraser. First, I would just like to notify the members of the committee, given this ambiguity with regard to the ability with regard to the problem with TQS and the fact that this perhaps jeopardizes the broadcasting of the Olympic Games in both official languages, I would just like to say that we, the members of the Liberal Party, on this committee will be tabling a motion to ensure that the members of the consortium come before this committee to explain, so we can see what the variable problems are. So I just want to say that we will be tabling that motion for consideration by the committee. This being said, one of the things, because 3 minutes goes by very quickly. We know all the problems the RCMP can have when providing services to francophones. You know the case in New Brunswick with Ms. Paulin and etc. Now, concerning the Olympic Games, do you have any concerns with regard to the security situation? Do you have any concerns that the francophones from our country and elsewhere, will they have to go before the Supreme Court to avail themselves of their rights? The entire security aspect, do you not fear that it will not comply with official language requirements to ensure that francophones in this country and francophones from elsewhere, that they won't have to make 25 calls to be sure that they will be able to be served in French and receive information in French? And Mr. Chair, it is exactly from this angle that we are trying to raise the issue of the Olympics. When we talk to other institutions like the RCMP, like DND, Mr. Dussault, perhaps you could talk about the discussions that we've held with other institutions in the context of the Olympic Games. As the Commissioner said, we have already begun discussions with a number of federal institutions, for example, the airport authorities of Pearson Airport in Toronto, with the Canadian Border Services here in Ottawa and at specific airports. The Commissioner met with the RCMP Commissioner not long ago. That is something that he mentioned to Mr. Elliott. Now, we intend to step up our preventive activities with regard to those institutions for the very reason that, as the Commissioner said earlier, that enables us to use the fact that the Olympic Games are coming up to make all institutions more aware, all federal institutions more aware of their responsibilities to offer these security services in both official languages. So this work has already begun. We're trying to step up our action with that regard in coming months. Thank you, gentlemen. We will now go to Mr. Daniel Petit on the government side. Thank you. I'm going to go back to what you said earlier. I would like to know, my colleague Mr. Chong asked you a question on page 74 of your report. Can you tell us approximately what date you expect to table your report concerning bilingualism in the universities? Point of order, Mr. Chair. I asked that we have 2 hours on these subjects. Any subject that we want, you refused. This question is not relevant to the topic on the agenda, so I would ask my colleague to ask. I would ask my questions to put questions on the Olympics. Mr. Coderre, I didn't hear the full question because you interrupted it. You know that he is reading the report, so the official opposition. Mr. Coderre, you've been heard. Mr. Petit, if you would like to continue. Point of order. So I'm going to continue with my point of order. Mr. Chair, I want people to know that the official opposition fully agreed with the way that Mr. Petit wanted us to proceed today. And if he was with us, then if he voted with us, then he could have asked that question. But Mr. Chair called me to order and said that we would proceed as it was on the agenda. So I would ask the chair to apply the agenda. Mr. Coderre, I will apply the agenda, but I would like to hear Mr. Petit's question first. So on that, we will continue with Mr. Petit. Mr. Chair, what I'm going to do is I will give you my question in writing, and then you will be able to answer me. I have 2 topics I wanted to talk about, justice, and I had a question coming back to Mr. Chong's question. Secondly, concerning the Olympic Games, you said that there are still a number of issues concerning a certain situation. When Mr. Furlong came, I asked whether the welcoming committee at the airport, at least would there be services available in French? So if someone is addressed in English, will they get mad? And also, I was assured that the Vancouver airport was part and parcel of VANOC. That's what he said. I imagine you travel to that airport frequently. Do you sense that currently the arrival of the 2010 Olympic Games, that's in a very short time, do you sense that there is by certain bilingualism in the airport, or is it just for the Olympic period? Because you said something that interests me. I would like there to be a follow-up and that the bilingualism continues. It's not just over a certain period of time. So you, as an individual and as a commissioner who uses that airport, have you seen a change in that airport? Mr. Chair, yes, indeed. Mr. Furlong spoke to me about, actually, when he talked to me, the agreement was being negotiated to ensure that when passengers arrive at Vancouver International Airport, they are already on the Olympic site. So all measures that are taken to ensure that the Olympic site functions in both languages will also apply to the Vancouver airport. However, I have heard from passengers, but who did not file a formal complaint, that there is still some work to be done with regard to bilingualism, with regard to signage, with regard to announcements at the airport. There is also a committee within the public service, and there are obligations that are already in place. And I would say one thing. I don't want to raise the specter of a tragedy that occurred there, but the incident that occurred at the Vancouver airport means that this airport is much more attuned to the language question than it used to be. And we are using the efforts that have been made with regard to linguistic duality in the airport to educate the other institutions, as Mr. Dussault has said. Thank you, Commissioner Fraser. Mr. Gravel. I don't know if I'll be able to ask my question because it's not about the Olympics. We'll give you the benefit of the doubt. Concerning official languages, Commissioner Fraser, I'm going to come back to something that you said. You said that you wanted the federal government to take advantage of the renewal of the public service to attach value to linguistic duality. Mr. Gravel, I don't know if you noticed, so Mr. Gravel, we're talking about the Vancouver Olympic Games here. Point of order, Mr. Godin. Out of respect, a member should be able to ask his question and finish it. He might be making a link between the public service and the Vancouver Olympic Games. If the official opposition of Canada, which never votes in the House of Commons, if it wants to act like a baby this morning, that's fine. But I think that the member should be able to ask his question. Mr. Gravel, I can assure you, the interpreter would like to point out that everyone is talking at the same time and she is unable to interpret. I will not ask my question because it's not about the Olympics, Commissioner Fraser, so thank you very much. Mr. Gravel, have you done? Or have you finished? Mr. Godin. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to bring the Commissioner back to his report on page 144. It's in his report. On page 144 of your report, you say that in the second paragraph, recognizing its responsibilities under the Official Languages Act. And so what I understand is that Radio-Canada has obligations towards the official languages. What are the two official languages of this country, Commissioner Fraser? If I've read my mandate correctly, French and English. Well, I'm looking at CBC right now, which is producing which is showing hockey broadcasts, hockey games, in Punjabi and in Mandarin. And are those two languages, are they official languages of this country?
No, Mr. Chairman. All right. I don't intend to give up now. Radio-Canada has a mandate. And I think, given these are the Olympic Games, I think they should be able to find a solution. They're the only ones, in French really, who are able to broadcast throughout this country in areas where others cannot. The way I interpret that, I feel that it shows that they have to recognize that they have these obligations under the Official Languages Act. Mr. Chairman, I will be quite cautious in responding to this. We fundamentally disagree with CBC Radio-Canada when it comes to their responsibilities under the Official Languages Act, and specifically responsibilities under Part 7 of the Act, which requires federal institutions to take positive measures for the development of official language minority communities. We believe, as all other federal institutions referred to, that Radio-Canada has obligations just like these other federal institutions. Radio-Canada is of the view that everything that has to do with programming are areas for which they are accountable only to the CRTC. I asked to meet with Mr. Lacroix to see whether there is some way of dealing with this conflict in terms of interpretation. But we have expressed our views on page 144 as to our view of the matter. But CBC Radio-Canada holds a completely different view as to its obligations under the Official Languages Act. Thank you very much. This brings to a close our round of questions. Perhaps we will have time for one or two questions before we close or end this meeting today. Mr. Chong? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a small question.
The report on post-secondary education and bilingualism would be completed. Your study would be completed.
We've sent out the questionnaire last week, I think. This week, I signed the letters to all the various heads of institutions. We're hoping that the information will be collected in the fall and the report will be finished by the end of the year.
I'm sorry, the questions have to pertain to the Olympic Games. Mr. Coderre. Everything's all right? They've taken away the PMO's mic. I have a simple question, Mr. Chairman. Given the situation with TQS, things are not going well at this point. Do you not think that the Official Languages Commissioner should request once again to the VANOC, ask the VANOC to once again ask the IOC about the way in which the Olympic Games were supposed to be broadcast? Regarding Formula One, there was agreement between LDS and Radio-Canada. Radio-Canada does not want to get involved because they lost the bid. If Mr. Godin had understood how it worked in terms of broadcasting, I can explain it to him if he'd like. But it's a business issue, really. Listen, that's enough. You attacked me earlier on. Mr. Cordell is not the one deciding whether my point of order is acceptable or not, in order or not. We had to fight them when we wanted the games in French and Bathurst. That's so false. I was responsible myself for the signs, says Mr. Cordell. Do you not think the Commissioner for Official Languages should issue a request, given the situation with TQS today, to make sure that broadcasting be available to everyone? Because at this point, it doesn't seem to be the case. I would hesitate to take a stand on the future of a given television network that is far outside of the ambit of my mandate. I know that they are before the CRTC at this point. We are aware of the tentativeness of this situation. We don't have any more information, but we will be following the situation closely. I understand your situation, but given the fact that you're sensitive to this issue of access, can I at least expect that you will look into the situation, and if something more is required, that you may raise the point with VANOC to express the concerns raised by our committee. Mr. Chairman, I do think it is important for the government to act if TQS is not in a position to provide services as expected under the contract agreements. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you for your attendance here today, and we will be here on the collaboration agreements next Tuesday. Thank you very much, Commissioner.